Bunch of new cards for you recently. Let's start with Living Roots. Living Roots shares a similarity with two cards currently in the game. Arcane Shot for Hunter, Holy Smite for Priest. Both deal 2 damage. Both are not being played at all. So that it can also do something else, and it's strictly better, it does not overpower the card. So instead of doing the 2 damage, you can summon 2 1/1 saplings. The question is, how good is 2 1/1s for 1 mana? Is it competitive enough to run over Zombie Chow? Especially for Druids, which often will want to do exact amounts of damage with Force of Nature Savage Roar, so the 5 healing really does matter. Zombie Chow has mostly been cut out of most of the decks of Druid, as of now, mostly because Patron Warrior is in the game. So the question is, for those decks which you don't need to deal 2 damage, which would be against aggro decks, can you get away with summoning 1/1 saplings? In fact, summoning 1/1 saplings is really good against the super aggro decks, which often have 2 1s. Then your Living Roots for 1 mana counters 2 of their 1 health guys. This is one of those cards which people look at and are like, oh yeah, it's strictly better than Holy Smite, strictly better than Arcane Shots. And those cards, they've seen some play, so therefore this one should be good. I'm a little more tempered with this one. The Zombie Chow also deals with 2 2/1s, and it doesn't quite get that much play. Here's one big thing that makes the card better than Holy Smite and Arcane Shot. And it's obvious, you can actually play it on turn 1 and just get 2 1/1 saplings. Turn 1 and getting that wasn't ever that great, because Rogue never ran Coin Defias Ringleader, but really the flexibility, in fact they can deal just 2 damage, solid card. Some people have been pointing out that this card replaces the Zombie Chow or early game minions, and you can get a better joust off of it, and that's fair. In that specific circumstance, I could actually see this working out fairly well. You can hide the Living Roots, the saplings, behind a taunt, and then you Savage Roar them. That's like 1 mana for 2 3/1s, and that's pretty good. A very sturdy card. I don't think it's OP. I think it's good. Will it see play is kind of waffling for me. Probably sees play in some Druid decks. In Arena, this card will be really good because Arcane Shot and Holy Smite tend to be above average, and the fact that this one can be played on turn 1 to boost the advantage if you don't need to deal 2 damage early is really good. Flash Heal, that's a handy card. Very, very efficient. Probably the most healing for mana that you will ever get. There's been some cards in the past that have just restored health, like the Paladin Holy Light, 2 mana restore 6 health. This card outclasses it so hard. And the Druid one, Healing Touch, 3 mana restore 8 health. Now, the thing about Flash Heal, though, is that Priests already had a card like this. Light of the Naru, restore 3 health, and summon a Light Warden some of the time. And you would usually seek to play it so that it summons the Light Warden. And the question is the extra 2 health it restores worth not getting a 1/2, which potentially gets ridiculously gigantic? And my answer is no to that. However, what some people have been interested about is that you can actually get the Flash Heal like Super Bomb with the Akanai Soul Priest, and in normal cases I think that Light of the Naru is still better, because with Akanai Soul Priest you deal 3 damage, you still get a 1/2. Is it worth dealing an extra 2 damage to not get that Light Warden? Debatable. Certainly a lot better if you're nuking down a 5 health minion, but what is also possible is some kind of 1-turn kill combo where you probably reduced with Emperor Thorsan. So the dream that some people are proposing is you go Valen, you go Akanai Soul Priest. Now normally that costs 11 mana, but if you get everything reduced in Thorsan land by 1, the Valen costs 6, the Akanai costs 3, so that's 9. And then you do the Flash Heal, and that's 20 damage. 20 damage for just 4 cards. You throw in a Mind Blast, and that's actually 5 damage. 5 cards, 30 damage, through taunt. That's actually something that sounds reasonable. Well, technically you need the 6th card with Thorsan, but when you think about it, like, that kind of combo doesn't seem that out of place. The current reigning champion patron deck, you're usually using the Emperor Thorson anyways, and you usually have to have Frothing Berserker, Warsong Commander, Grim Patron, Inner Rage, Whirlwind, and have a Deathspite equipped. So that's also kind of a 6-card combo. Now the problem is the Flash Heal and the Mind Blast, they don't have the utility that Patron does, because the Patron cards do have utility. You can play the Frothing Berserker as a 2/4, you can play the Patron when it's not turn 10, you can play the Whirlwind to deal with aggro, your Inner Rage can cycle with Acolyte of Pains, but Flash Heal has a much less useful component. Like, yes, you can do Akanai Soul Priest Flash Heal if you're up against someone who's aggro, but to survive until turn 10 with dead cards in your hand, that's a lot harder. When you're Warrior, you draw cards with Slam, which is a Warrior class card, you draw cards with Battle Rage, which is a Warrior class card, you draw cards with Shield Block, which is a Warrior class card. It's a lot more difficult to get the Circle of Healing to draw you the cards that Battle Rage does, though it sometimes can. You do have the Acolyte engine with the Pyromancer, but that's less likely than Warriors with their Whirlwinds and Deathspites. It just feels like the Patron deck is more consistent than the Priest Healy deck. Not to mention, like, Patrons also serve the purpose of clearing low-cost minions, and Frothing can fight, and it's so interesting that, like, a card which is as simple as 1 mana, restore 5 health, can possibly lead to an entire new deck archetype. And, like, off of just 2 minutes of thinking about it, could happen, but I think it's less consistent than Warrior Patron, so therefore it's outclassed. That said, though, if there's a 30 damage combo, which takes only 5 cards with only a 1-card setup, I'm willing to humor that as potentially good. And Priest has been a class which could be dangerous to put in exactly a cheap healing card, precisely because such a combo could arise. In Arena, Holy Light isn't very good, and kind of for the same reason. Holy Light isn't good. It's even worse than in Paladin, in some extent, in Arena, because your hero power also already restores health. You can't do the combos, and it's difficult to justify putting in a card which is only a support card when your hero power already does the same. Granted, it does a lot more, but taking a card, I think at best it would be an average card. And to what I suspect in Arena, it would be like a below average card. Kind of interesting and constructed, though. Alextrasza's Champion. Wow, it's a 2-mana 3/3 charge if you're holding a dragon. And if you're not, it's just a 2-mana 2/3, which is pretty far below average in the constructed scene. So I'll state the obvious that a 2-mana 3/3 charge is really good. What is difficult, though, is that dragon decks have consistently been control decks. A 2-mana 3/3 charge is especially good in an aggressive deck. In a control deck, it's less good. You would still probably run it, though. When you kind of think about it, Fiery War Axe is kind of like a 2-mana 3/30 charge, because you have 30 health. Could it possibly revitalize some kind of aggressive warrior which runs fairy dragons as their early game dragons and then runs some other cheap cards? And as good as a 2-mana 3/3 dragon is, I just don't really see it happening. Difficult, and this is the type of card that I like. It's pushing another type of deck, but I don't think the cards are in place to support such a card yet. Kind of similar to how Screwjank Clinker is so theoretically good. That card is a 4-mana 4/7 with 2/2 worth of charge, and anyone could tell you that card's really good. But it just turns out to not be played because the cards supporting it weren't there. And it kind of similarly goes into the Blackwing Technician, where in theory a 3-mana 3/5 is really good, but it just isn't quite good enough to justify that you have to run dragons and the risk that you don't have the dragon, and it's just a 3-mana 2/4, which is meh. Alextrasza's champion kind of feels the same way like that to me. So I don't see this being played. Worth mentioning is that there is currently a warrior deck archetype which runs dragons, Control Warrior, but the thing is it usually only runs 3 dragons, and what are you going to do? Are you going to keep this Alexstrasza's champion and your Alexstrasza in your opening hand? Nah, that's not so good. So, meh. In Arena, it's going to be a 2-mana 2/3 with a slight upside sometimes, so it's going to be average to slightly above average. We have Confuse. The new priest card has a cute effect, swap the attack and health of all minions. In the past, Crazed Alchemist was most attached to priest because priest has a lot of high health minions, and it has a lot of spells, Shadow Word Pain, Shadow Word Death, which Swapperoo can help with because you can actually use the spells then. The main problem with Confuse is it's like Inner Fire, except it's en masse. I don't think it's really that valuable to have a card which serves as Inner Fire number 3 or 4 in the sake of consistency for your Inner Fire deck. And it's also not worth it to mass Inner Fire, with, of course, not all of the benefits of Inner Fire. The artwork is cool. That Torn and Dwarf are totally trippin', but it just turns out that I think the card is a bit too cute, and it doesn't do enough. You know what might have been fun, though? You attached Draw a Card to the card, and that becomes kind of fun. Anyways, as stands, I think the card has far too specific of an effect. It's too much like Inner Fire, which is not being played, and I don't see this actually making waves, though it is fun. In Arena, this card, I cannot possibly fathom the type of synergy you can even work this in to Arena with. It's not going to work. Warhorse Trainer. People have likened this card to one arm, men. So the most notable comparison of Warhorse Trainer is to Quartermaster. Your Silver Hand recruits get a permanent +2/+2. Warhorse Trainer, that buff disappears as soon as the Warhorse Trainer dies. There's some dreams where you go coin, muster for battle, and then you go Warhorse Trainer, but that's actually not that much better than Direwolf Alpha, and surprisingly it's not that much better than Raid Leader. It is better than Raid Leader by quite a bit actually, because it gets +2 health, but it only hits the Silver Hand recruits, and Direwolf Alpha kind of has the same effect, except there's 1 mana less and 2 less health. So in that sense, some people have likened this 3-mana 2/4 to other good 3-mana 2/4s which have been played recently, such as Flamewaker and Imp-Gang Boss. Imp-Gang Boss, though, is not really a 2/4, it's more like a 3-mana 3/5 and sometimes a 3-mana 4/6. Flamewaker kind of has an immediate effect, with usually shooting like 2 missiles out immediately, or you would only play it out if you expected to be able to shoot out a lot of Flamewaker missiles. The thing about Warhorse Trainer is that it has an effect that is already in the game in the sense of Direwolf Alpha, and it only targeting Silver Hand recruits. Meh. It's actually most comparable to Leok, which isn't even that great a card. Like usually when people play 3-mana Animal Companion, they get Leok, they're like, oh, I'm so sad. Warhorse Trainer is basically Leok, except more specific. So when I put that all together, I'm actually not too impressed by Warhorse Trainer. I think it's not quite powerful enough to put in your usual Paladin deck, even with all the synergy of Muster for Battle and Inspire tokens, and that 3-mana 3/3 which gives you Silver Hand recruits with Inspire, and even with that Justicar card which lets you get 2 1/1s. Even with all this Silver Hand recruit synergy, I just don't see Warhorse Trainer as strong enough. Of course, with all that synergy with Silver Hand recruits, maybe 2 Quartermasters sees more play. In Arena, I think this 3-mana 2/4 card is going to be just dandy, pretty good, buffing your Silver Hand recruits, especially if Inspire takes on a bit more of an effect in Arena. and then you're more inclined to push the button, which you already have. 3 mana 2/4 isn't bad. Slight effect. Yeah, this should be acceptable in Arena. There's some people who try to debate with me that the Warhorse Trainer is just as immediate as the Flamewaker, because you would only play the Flamewaker if you had spells to cast, and you would only play the Warhorse Trainer if you already had Silverhand Recruits out. But I think it's much harder to get Silverhand Recruits on the board. Furthermore, you can't even summon Silverhand Recruits and then just play the Warhorse Trainer. That doesn't work. Your Silverhand Recruits need to live through the turn. And if you're a Paladin, people aren't going to let your Silverhand Recruits survive, because they're afraid of Quartermaster already. And this card isn't as good as Quartermaster to justify a slot. Fist of Jaraxxus. So 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. That's basically Flame Cannon, except you can also hit the face, and that's really unfortunate when you want to hit a minion and you hit the face. It is a really cool effect that it's one of the ways to get a freebie effect when you discard the card, and Warlocks do currently have a few ways to discard cards, which are commonly played. That would actually only be Doomguard, now that I think about it. Worth mentioning is that Fellreaver and this burning off the top of your deck unfortunately doesn't work. I would be a little bit optimistic about this card if it wasn't a random enemy and it was a random minion, because then you could just play your Doomguard and then pow, you wipe out the opponent's card. But the fact that it can sometimes hit the face, that's scary. You could have your super combo wombo combo with Malygos Soulfire. That's actually a deck that was there before, and possibly there's some kind of world where you manage to filter your hand enough that you can do Soulfire and you end up discarding Fist of Jaraxxus, and that ends up doing 18 damage with just those 2 cards and 1 mana and Malygos. But meh. I think it would have been cool if it were deal 4 damage to a random minion, enemy minion. I do put a lot of value onto free effects. When Flame Leviathan came out, I was actually pretty hyped about it. I was like, oh man, this card, just because you can sometimes get a 0 mana Hellfire going, that's worth it. Fist of Jaraxxus is a lot more controllable than Flame Leviathan, but I've learned a little since my Flame Leviathan review. 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a random enemy. It's real bad. The benefit of discarding this card is just too difficult and too unlikely to do to be practical. You usually want it to either deal damage to the face or to minions specifically, and the fact that it can do it randomly to either one, that also weakens the card by quite a bit. Strangely enough, the card might be stronger if it was just deal 4 damage to the enemy hero, because then you would absolutely know that it would hit the enemy hero and wouldn't just sometimes land on a minion if you were trying to combo it with Malygos Soulfire. Or if it only hit minions, then you would actually be possibly willing to try it out in your Doomguard and then discard the Fist of Jaraxxus and clear the board and then hit face. But that it's random is a really big downside. I think the effect is cool, but I think it's too finicky and too difficult to pull off. In Arena, this card is basically going to be 4 mana, deal 4 damage to a random enemy, which is really bad. Charged Hammer. The first question to ask is a 4 mana 2/4 weapon actually any good? And I think over time it's kind of been established that a 3 mana 2/3 weapon isn't good, in the case of Stormforged Axe. And a 3 mana 3/3 weapon perhaps is even not so good. So 4 mana 2/4, that's not that great. So the question is that Death Rattle good enough to justify a 4 mana 2/4? So I would start by saying, yes, having your hero power as Shaman become deal 2 damage is going to be a buff over Summon a Random Totem, but it's not that good. You can, in fact, play this and then replace your weapon, but in that case, you are basically paying the Shadow Form card in the cost. And yes, possibly you get in your 2 damage twice with the Charged Hammer, and then you replace it, and then you become Shadow Formed, but that's basically paying like 1 or 2 mana for for a 2/2, which isn't that great. It's a really interesting card. Just feels a bit too weak. A bit too slow, so to say. When you're at 4 mana, it's rare that your 2 attack is going to kill something. That's usually at the point of the game where there's going to be 5 or 4 health minions out there, which cost 3 or 4 mana. So at best, your Charged Hammer is going to assist in the killing of those things. Even the Doom Hammer, which is a 5 mana 2/8 with Wind Fury, even in the control decks, it sometimes wasn't seen just because it wasn't quite powerful enough. Even though for just 1 more mana, you're getting 4 more durability and you're getting the ability to attack twice. So then the question kind of goes back around to, then we're actually focusing on making our hero power become deal 2 damage. But in order for that to happen, it feels like you would need to use the Charged Hammer on turn 4? I mean, you don't have to do it on turn 4, but the later in the game you get, the less relevant deal 2 damage as your hero power is. And then you need to spend another turn replacing your weapon. Just feels slow. So I don't think it'll work out. And yes, I did count the Doom Hammer as 5 mana when it actually is 7 mana. If Doom Hammer were only 5 mana, it would become super good. That's true. But still, it kind of goes to showcase, since think back to the times where you'd want to play Doom Hammer on turn 5, and it's kind of rare, because just attacking things for 2 at that stage in the game doesn't work that much. I guess it's a slight tangent to how Doomhammer and its overload actually makes a pretty big effect, because Doomhammer would be substantially less good at 7 mana. Even in Arena, I'm not sure that a 4 mana 2/4 weapon is fast enough to use, and Stormforged Axe tends to be pretty good in Arena, and that's 3 mana, 2+1. But the thing is, being able to play that Axe on 2 is a pretty good thing, because you can play it and counter their 2 mana 3/2. Charged Hammer, it comes online a bit late. Spend your whole turn doing it, only to deal 2 damage a turn. It slows you down on the turn that you play it a lot. And then, over time, you'll get the benefit off of it. I think the card will be okay in Arena. Not spectacular, not bad. The Grand Crusader. First of all, I'll prelude this by saying that I'm a big fan of most cards which add cards to your hand or draw cards, because that's something that I feel like control decks are lacking right now, the ability to draw cards. So even if you're just adding a random card to your hand, I'm still happy. And this one is an interesting effect of add a random Paladin card to your hand. This card can kind of be evaluated just based off of its statistics. 5 mana, 5/5 would require a slight improvement in order to be good. For 6 mana, a 6/7 isn't quite good enough. There's not currently a 6 mana card, which is a minion which draws you a card. At least not one that's being commonly played right now. For 5 mana, you had Azure Drake, which is being run in some decks. 5 mana 4/4, and you get the benefit of a spell damage +1. So basically, you kind of evaluate it and note that 6 mana 5/5, draw a card. Okay, I might be willing to run that. But the downside is it's a random Paladin card. And Paladin cards, there's some trash in there. You've got your Eye for an Eye, you've got your Repentance, you've got just so many 1 mana secrets, which are so bad. You do have some really good class cards, but the Quartermaster has no synergy. The card we just previewed earlier, the 3 mana 2/4, that's just the 3 mana 2/4. Drawing a card is obviously going to be a lot better than adding a random Paladin card to your hand. So I guess the first thing to think about is a 6 mana 5/5 draw a card even going to be playable? Obviously, when you compare this to Ancient of Lore, which is 7 mana 5/5 draw 2 cards, you can see just how insane Ancient of Lore is. For 1 more mana, you draw an additional card. And not just that, it's not a random Paladin card, but it's 2 actual cards that you put in your deck. I guess another comparison you can make is with Sylvanas, which is also a 6 mana 5/5, and it doesn't draw a card, but what it sometimes does is it takes a card from the opponent. And in that case, it's almost like you take their card and you put it on your side, and it's very tempo based, and that's kind of like drawing 2 cards. Of course, Sylvanas doesn't always work out that way, and often Sylvanas ends up just being a 6 mana 5/5 with no effect. When you compare it with Azure Drake, it's like, yeah, this is the next step up, but Azure Drake wasn't even being played in that many decks other than Oil Rogue, mostly because you could get your backstab immediately used for 3 damage, and also because you could preparation out the Eviscerate, which does 5 damage. The spell damage did matter a little bit. The first thing to think about is a 6 mana 5/5 draw card good? And I think it's not quite good enough. And then the second step is, okay, a random Paladin card is obviously less good than a card, so, not good enough. I guess another thing to compare it to, like, it's tough finding a comparison just because there aren't that many cards that draw cards, and I really hope that there are more cards that draw cards, so like I can even appreciate the Grand Crusader, though I would hope that you would get a little bit better of quality. Like, you know what would be fun? 7 mana 5/5, add 2 random Paladin cards to your hand. That would be fun. So while we're stretching for comparisons, you can compare this to Cairn, which is a 6 mana 4/5, Death Rattle, get a 4/5, and in some instances you consider that Cairn Death Rattle 4/5 should basically be a card. And it's a pretty reasonable card. That also seems better than draw a card, at just the cost of a stat. Not really comparable, but I'm going to make the comparison anyways. In Arena, a world where a 5 mana 4/4 draw card is really good. In addition, this is in the epic slot, and quite a few epic cards are actually rather bad. This card will be in the above average category, just because card advantage is so key. And sometimes you'll get a really terrible card, but a card is a card. So, cool cards. They do a lot of wacky, crazy things. Time will tell to whether or not those are viable in Constructed. I think that the wacky, crazy things tend to take a little too long to set up to be useful in a practical game of cutthroat Hearthstone. What do you think about the set now that there are a lot out there? Okay, so we're just a little under half. So far, and it's very difficult to say without seeing the whole picture, of course. So far, I hate to say this, but I don't think the meta is going to get shaken up enough by these cards. So far, I've been like kind of, these cards aren't that strong, but we'll see. If only these cards got released so far, I don't think there would be much of an effect on the meta. So hopefully the next half is a lot better in terms of power level. Or who knows, I could be completely wrong, as usual.